Tvameva mata cha pita tvameva Tvameva bandhuscha sakha tvameva Tvameva vidya dravinam tvameva Tvameva sarvam mama deva deva. Thou art my mother, thou art my father, thou art my friend and companion. Thou art my wealth and wisdom. Thou art my everything, O Lord of Lords. Today's topic is the Gita and our Guna guides. I don't really know about what the origin of the concept of the gunas is. It's in the Gita a lot, but I imagine that it's something like this. Being highly observant, the seers looked at nature and saw that it appeared in one of three modes in succession. It could be wild, turbulent, rainy, snowy, windy. It could be hot, suffocating, cloying, inert. It could be peaceful, calm, and pleasant. And they looked at how this affected humans, and they found a direct link. It seems to me that this is probably the primary discovery of a macro-microcosmic mirroring in nature. And so it became the fundamental stance of the first philosophical system called Sankhya. The seers wanted to describe what they saw, so they invented the term guna to indicate in what mode nature was currently appearing. By the way, the word is pronounced with a palatal N, so the N is like nah back there. I'm probably not going to be doing that all the time, but that is the proper pronunciation. They used three terms to describe these observations. Rajas was the term that used for the wild and turbulent side of nature. Tamas for the inert periods. And Sattva for the harmonious, peaceful times. These terms then became applied to human behavior by extension, so that by the time of the Gita, it was a well-established explanation for nature, both external and human. On the human side, we can actually call this a psychology, as we will see as we go forward. So why do we study the concept of gunas today? Well, because they give us a window into the operation of the mind. The Gita is written in a static, when it talks about the gunas, in a kind of a static, descriptive kind of a way. But Krishna is actually advising us to look deeply into the workings of the mind. I say mind, not my mind or our mind, because as a subcategory of consciousness itself, some philosophers say that there is only one mind appearing as many. Essentially, these gunas then are one, but in expression three. Now, so let's talk a little bit about the Sankhya philosophy, which is somewhat explicated in the Gita. These subtle cosmic constituents evolve into different categories of existence. So you start with the main idea of Prakriti, which is a very, very abstract term for nature. That is, nature in its most abstract appearance, or as an idea, nature as an idea. And then these three modes or qualities, which they term gunas, are sort of the essence of changeability within Prakriti. They appear they can be called attributes, they can also be called characteristics. There's a lot of different words in English. We don't have a direct word to translate it. These things are not physical. They're qualitative and conceptual. It's not like there's an actual guna hanging around anywhere, okay? Although in the Sankhyan philosophy, since they said everything that derives from nature is in some way a kind of a substance. They were dealing with matter, the evolution of matter from this most basic conceptual notion of Prakriti. And so sometimes they call gunas constituents. Within the Sankhya philosophy, that's probably true, that's so, because that's how they evolved the idea. But from our point of view, it's much more conceptual than that. They're not really a physical kind of thing at all. So, we use the term in two ways. When applied to Mother Nature, the word guna can be translated as a disposition, a mode, or a quality. The word, as applied to human beings, the word guna can mean characteristic, trait, or property. So we have to kind of, when we're reading the Gita or whatever, we kind of have to know on what level is Krishna applying this particular verse. Is he talking about nature, like external nature, or is he talking about human nature?
Sorry, how do you spell Guna?
G-U-N-A, but the N is palatal.
Got it, thank you.
Okay, so the knowledge obtained from the observation of our self and others is for us alone. We don't go around labeling or judging other people. This is sort of a caveat as to where this talk is going to be going. As Vivekananda says, we can't see what we also don't contain. So that means we all share to some degree the same desirable and undesirable qualities. Now, I want to just kind of like do a little aside here and say, well, another way of looking at nature is, from our standpoint, that the Divine Mother has manufactured kind of a maze for us, otherwise known as Maya or the divine illusion, and we have to wend our way through it. So there will be dead ends, there will be retraced steps, but also some booby traps along the way, and it's all part of a big game. Remember, even the bad guys in the Mahabharata all ended up in heaven. They were just playing a part in a huge drama. And so, this knowledge should prevent us from being terribly judgmental about ourselves or others, because it is a grand drama. So I'm going to begin by just picking out verses, not picking them out exactly, but I chose verses that refer to the three gunas sort of together, and then went on later to select the ones specifically that refer to each of the gunas. So I'm not going to do this at all in Sanskrit because it would take forever. So I've got sometimes more than one translation for each verse, but I thought it would be very useful because they're kind of scattered throughout the Gita. And so this, kind of brings them down to one place. And here and there I might do some commentary. Okay, so in chapter 2, verse 45, one translation says, "The Vedas are such that their scope is confined to the three gunas. Be free from those three gunas, Arjuna, indifferent toward the pairs of opposites, eternally fixed in truth, free from thoughts of acquisition and comfort, possessed of the self." Another translation of the same verse says, the Vedas enumerate the three gunas. Transcend the three gunas, O Arjuna. Be free from the pairs of opposites, ever balanced, unconcerned with getting and keeping, and centered in the self. So basically he's saying you have to go beyond the Vedas, okay? Because the Vedas are going to talk about what we call like the transactional world, okay, in all of its aspects. From chapter 13, he verily sees who sees that all actions are done by Prakriti alone, and that the Atman is actionless. Having no beginning and possessing no gunas, this supreme self, imperishable, though dwelling in the body, neither acts nor is tainted. From chapter 14, purity, passion, and ignorance are the qualities which the law of nature brings forth. They fetter the free spirit in all beings. When the seer perceives no agent other than the gunas and knows that which is higher than the gunas, he enters into my being. This is Krishna speaking, my being. The embodied one, having crossed over these three gunas out of which the body is originated, is freed from birth, death, decay, and pain, and attains to immortality. Now back to chapter 3. The gunas of Prakriti perform all karma. With one's understanding clouded by egoism, man thinks, I am the doer. Commentary. When this identity is cut off, this very moment the person is free. That is, knowing that she really is not the doer. But the one intuitive into the nature of guna and karma knows that gunas as senses merely abide with gunas as objects and does not become entangled. So this whole perceptual process, objectified, becomes, just these sense organs dealing with whatever's in front of us. But that has nothing really to do with the inner essence, the inner Atman, the inner self. Those deluded by the gunas of Prakriti get attached to the functions of the gunas. There is no being on earth that is liberated from the three gunas of Prakriti. So it's baked in. It's baked into the system. You can't get around it. It's sort of like people, trying to get out of Maya. Well, yes, you can get out of Maya only sort of by, in a sense, escaping the system, which by definition is impossible. As long as you're in the system, you have to escape by recognizing that your inner essence is separate from that. Deluded by these threefold this is chapter 7. Deluded by these threefold dispositions of Prakriti, the gunas, this world does not know me, who am above them all and immutable. Now, this next verse is really very, as far as I'm concerned, it's very pivotal. I return to it over and over again. The Lord does not create agency nor actions for the world. He does not create union with the fruits of action. Nature does all this. Prakriti functions on its own, in a sense. Another translation of that same verse, the Lord of this universe has not ordained activity or any incentive thereto, nor any relation between an act and its consequence. All this is the work of nature. Chapter 15. The deluded do not see him, the inner essence, who departs, stays, and enjoys, who is conjoined with the qualities, but they see who possess the eye of wisdom, or the clear vision of truth. Now, Krishna, in primarily the 18th chapter, I think it's the 18th, oh, 17th, sorry, 17th? 17th and 18th, yes. Details the difference between the characteristics, or gunas, under certain topics. So he'll go through topic by topic. So the topics are sacrifice, austerity, gift giving, abandonment or renunciation, knowledge, action, agent, understanding and or intellect, firmness, and happiness. Now, I've taken these topics and regrouped them by guna. So this yields, I think, and I hope, a more comprehensive picture of the nature of a person under the sway of each of these modes. So anyway, you can decide that for yourself, but it's somewhat, in my mind, if you're studying the gunas, the characteristics, the qualities, it's better done one characteristic at a time rather than by these other topics. So, in truth, actions are not by themselves, the three gunas being Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. They're not by themselves sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic, but the context, the manner, and the purpose, etc., are what is important. The doer makes the action right or wrong. The doer alone knows this, and not necessarily an outside observer. Someone can observe you doing something and impute completely a wrong motive. They really don't know. Only the person acting really knows where they're coming from. Therefore, this whole thing is sort of a self-analysis, like a template for self-analysis. So the most, shall we say, balanced or of the gunas, of the qualities, is called sattva. Sattva comes from two Sanskrit words, sat for truth, and tva, that alone. So, or principle. It can be a principle. So sattva is what's rooted in truth. Okay, there's going to be a lot of repetition in these quotes, but that's straight from the Gita, so I can't do anything about that. So try and pick out what's useful, to you, or illuminating, or whatever. Sattva, being stainless, is luminous and unobstructive, free from disease. It binds by attachment to virtue and knowledge, O sinless one. When the splendorous light of intelligence or knowledge beams through all the gateways of the body, then sattva is predominant. Okay, now comes some of the items that were on the list. Sacrifice, which is observed following the scriptures by those desiring no specific result, with their mind fixed only on the sacrifice itself for its own sake, this is sattvic. There's the threefold austerity of body, speech, and mind, practiced by the steadfast with the utmost faith, desiring no specific results. That austerity is sattvic. The gift, which is given at the proper place and time, only with the thought, this is to be given to a worthy person who has done no prior favor, or to one who can make no return, with the feeling that it is one's duty to give, this is sattvic. This is a sattvic gift. Whatever obligatory work is done merely because it ought to be done, abandoning attachment and also fruit, that abandonment is sattvic. Okay, abandoning attachment, not abandoning the work. The knowledge by which one imperishable being is seen in all existences, undivided in the divided, know that knowledge to be sattvic. That action, which is ordained and free from attachment, performed without desire or hate, with no wish to obtain a result, that action is sattvic. Released from attachment, non-egoistic, endued with firmness and zeal, and unaffected by success or failure, that agent, that performer, that doer is sattvic. So again, I'm going to read that one again. Released from attachment, non-egoistic, endued with firmness and zeal, and unaffected by success or failure, that agent is sattvic. That understanding, which knows the paths of work and renunciation, that is, when to act and when not to act, right and wrong action, that is, what is to be done and what is not to be done, what is to be feared and what is not to be feared, along with the knowledge of bondage and liberation, this understanding is sattvic. Okay, we need to unpack this one. When to act and when not to act. You don't want to be impetuous, impulsive, whatever, under certain circumstances. It may be a delicate circumstance, whatever. You need to know when to bide your time and wait for the proper time to act. This is interesting. What is to be feared and what is not to be feared? Okay, this doesn't refer to like, okay, I'm walking in the jungle and I'm afraid of the tiger. No. It means what is to be feared, what is going to take me from the spiritual path? What is going to take away my freedom, in a sense, my inner, what is going to affect my inner essence in a negative kind of way? That's what's to be feared. What's not to be feared is the opposite, of course, and that is whatever feeds my soul, whatever is going to promote my inner well-being, my best well-being. Okay, so it's not a physical kind of a thing necessarily at all. It could be totally, circumstantial. It could be, what is to be feared, what is not to be feared. Okay, if you're alcoholic, let's say, well then you don't want to go someplace where there's going to be a lot of alcohol flowing, okay? Because that's going to pull you away from what's best for you, okay? So that kind of a thing. This is a behavioral, this is like an inner development. How can we, it's part of our self-culture. How can we cultivate an inner being that is aligned with the truth, sattva? Okay. couple more. The unswerving firmness by which, through yoga, the functions of the mind, the prana, and the senses are regulated, that is sattvic. That which is, okay, this is interesting. That which is like poison at first, but like nectar at the end, that happiness is said to be sattvic, born of the intellect due to self-realization, or born from the tranquility of the spirit of oneself. Okay, that which is like poison at first, but like nectar at the end. This refers to, usually we talk about it as like spiritual practice. It's not easy to do a daily practice, particularly in the beginning when one doesn't seem to be noticing any particular changes or improvements or whatever you want to say. So in a sense, it's like poison. You have to steel yourself. You have to be firm. You have to know that this is for my ultimate good, not necessarily for my immediate good. It's for my ultimate good. So therefore, I will put my time and effort into this practice in order to reach that nectar at the end, okay? That blessed state, or whatever you want to call it, that condition of freedom, of detachment, of not being subjected to the vagaries of the mind. Okay, because the mind is really what tortures us. So that's what we need to supersede. So, born of the tranquility of the spirit of oneself. The Sanskrit word used here for spirit of oneself is buddhi prasadam. That's like a blessing. The blessing from the intelligence, that's rightly established intelligence. So since our intelligence is rightly established, therefore we agree to go through the training that's needed to be done in order to free ourselves. Okay. So, to understand things as they are is sattvic. This is kind of commentary. This is not from the Gita per se. Right and wrong are relative and depend on the attitude of the person. Our duties also change at different stages of life. So what was perhaps fine when we're sort of young and brash is not so fine, 20 years later if we're still acting the same way. It's kind of like, hello, grow up, Intelligence is intelligence only when it is in action. So the word here used is buddhi, which can also often translated as intellect, but I like the word intelligence better because that is a more active word. And how do we know that it exists unless we see it in action? Now, the detachment that comes with sattva means, let's define it as like the freedom to leave without looking back. It's just like the example Ramakrishna gives is the fellow who kind of hears the call and decides to renounce then and there, and he just walks off. He just throws the towel over his shoulder and just walks off. Leaves his family, leaves his work, leaves everything. It's just like time to renounce, bang, gone. Okay, so like that. But zeal must remain. This doesn't mean then that we go into some kind of a funk or something. This is the person who does karma yoga because the heart is given to God. He does things out of duty as an offering, regardless how anyone else reacts. We should be responsible and detached. Those things go together. Just because we're detached doesn't mean that suddenly we become calloused or anything like that. We should behave as an arrow released from the bow. Success and failure are immaterial. Once that arrow is gone, there's no more control. It's going to make the target or it's not. So we're just detached from that. The arrow's going to go where the arrow's going to go. No one needs to know your attitude. You don't need to, broadcast, where you're coming from or anything. You'll find out that most people won't believe you anyway, so no, don't bother. Going back to the question of success and failure, as the arrow is released from the bow, one way to kind of test whether we have detached from a result is simply to ask ourselves, once the result occurs, so what? I mean, if it's good, so what? If it's not good, so what? You've done your best. You've done what you're supposed to do. You've done your duty. Whatever happens, happens. Now, we're going to switch next to the next guna or quality called rajas. It comes from the same root word as the word for king in India. You remember, the rajas and all that? Okay, same word. From chapter 3. This force is desire and anger, of which the Raja Guna is the source. Voracious, all-consuming, all sinful, greatly injurious, know this to be the foe here. Okay, so Krishna, in the context of the Gita, where Arjuna is fighting real physical enemies, Krishna is redirecting it and saying, wait a minute, it's not these people per se, because he's objecting to killing his cousins and family members and things like that. The foe here is this Rajoguna, which is out of control. And this helps depersonalize then the task set before Arjuna. Know that Rajas is charged by passion, characterized by passion arising from thirst or craving, the word is trishna, and attachment. This binds down the embodied one by attachment to action. Yeah, Rajasic people are very active. Avarice, activity, and the undertaking of actions, disquietude, and desire are born when Rajas is dominant. Sacrifice, here we go through this list again. Sacrifice which is offered with a view to the fruit, in expectation of reward, or for self-glorification or hypocrisy. Know that to be Rajasic. For the sake of ostentation. I mean, the bad guy in the Gita was Duryodhana, and he was very generous, but it was also very ostentatious. It was like, okay, to the fellow who became his good friend, Karna, he was like, you don't have a kingdom, you're not really, okay, I will give you, and he did. He gave him like a whole section of India. Okay, now you're a king like me. But it bound them together, you see. So now the other guy he was not free to make any decisions because now he owed Duryodhana. Okay. Austerity, which is undergone with hypocrisy or ostentation for the sake of honor, respect, or reverence is rajasic, it is unstable and transitory. This is the Ramakrishna makes jokes about these guys that go around, like giving alms to the poor, but making sure that there are a lot of people watching them, so that they get like a good reputation. That people will think they're very, altruistic, whatever, and they're not. They're there strictly for other people to get this idea of them as being, so generous. Oh, that guy is so generous, Oh, speaking of which, here comes the gift. That gift which is given grudgingly, with the aim of recompense or with regard to its fruit, that is rajasic. He who abandons action merely because it is difficult or because it is painful performs a rajasic abandonment, and he obtains not the result thereof. So this kind of, okay, I'm going to give it up because it's really too difficult anyway. That's rajasic. He as we saw with, let me see, abandonment under Sattva. Whatever obligatory work is done merely because it ought to be done, abandoning attachment and also fruit, that abandonment is rajasic. So the rajasic guy is possibly going to abandon an action because it's painful, and he doesn't want to go through with it. And the sattvic person will do it because it needs to be done. It's like a duty, and it needs to be done, and you don't think about the result. That knowledge by which one only sees manifold entities of different kinds as varying from one another, that knowledge is rajasic. So there's compartmentalizing, there's no like overall umbrella of how these things, necessarily relate to one another or whatever. They're like in little different categories. So that's a rajasic way of understanding, or that's rajasic knowledge. That action which is done by one craving for desires, or with egoism, or with much effort, that is rajasic. Passionate, desiring to obtain the fruit of action, greedy, cruel, impure, moved by joy and sorrow, such an agent is rajasic. So action and agent. Those two things go together. That understanding or intellect which makes a distorted grasp or distinguishes incorrectly between the right and the wrong, and between that which is to be done and that which is not to be done, that is rajasic. You see, because they don't consider the consequences necessarily, because this person is completely under the sway of the ego. And it's like the ego wants what it wants, and the person just goes along with that. So irrespective of if anybody else gets shoved aside, or it's like this person wants to reach their goal, irrespective of what anybody else may, like any other stakeholders in the situation. Okay. The firmness by which one holds to duty, desire, and wealth, which with attachment and desire for the results of action, that is rajasic. That firmness is rajasic. Firmness is often translated also as will. So let's read it again. The will by which one holds to duty, desire, and wealth with attachment and desire for the results is rajasic. That happiness which arises from the contact of the senses and their objects, and which is like nectar in the beginning, but like poison at the end, is held to be rajasic. Okay, now this is a parallel construction to the one that was about sattva, but it's opposite. It's like nectar in the beginning, but like poison at the end. So the pleasure comes first, and that's the aim of the person is the pleasure. But then there's a backlash likely to happen, because if you overdo anything, it becomes unenjoyable, really unenjoyable, no matter what it is. If you drink, if the first drink is great, but by about the 10th drink, that's kind of like poison at the end. But it doesn't matter what it is. It could be ice cream. It could be, I don't know, it could be going on the, what do you call it, those roller coasters or something. If you do it about 10 times in a row, you might get sick. I mean, so it's like poison at the end. But the person in the beginning isn't thinking about the end result. They're only thinking about the pleasure at the front end, not looking beyond that. So the picture that emerges of a person under the sway of rajas is that the attachment keeps one in anxiety for the result, and it cripples us because it's a load on our mind. If we're looking for a specific result, that's what the mind is craving over and over again, and keep trying. This is why people keep trying and maybe perhaps not succeeding in a situation where perhaps if they sat down and thought about it, they would completely modify their way of approaching something. This whole situation is kind of considered normal for us, for most of us. This is kind of how society operates for the most part. And so, probably 80% of the people fall, within this category, myself included. Activity, hyperactivity sometimes. No, that was Rajasic because he's not looking at at the time that he's making that statement. He's not looking at the long-term consequences to society. He's not looking at the reason that they're having this conflict to begin with. He's kind of forgotten that, and he's brought it down to just, I don't want to kill these people. But Krishna keeps pointing out the fact to him that the real enemy isn't these people. The real enemy is what they're doing and the consequences of what they're doing, and how we have to uphold the Dharma, because these people are completely going against Dharma, and we have to reestablish the law in a sense for the betterment of society. Now, admittedly, the society is going to be reduced in number, but it has to be done. So it's like poison in the beginning. Okay? So, the fruits will be enjoyed later. So it's the end should be sattvic, although we have to go through this process. Okay. So this attachment is the source of Arjuna's anxiety, as is typical for everyone. This is, as I said, this is just considered normal. Sometimes under rajas, one pridefully overextends oneself, and sometimes we undertake tasks that are beyond our ability or without matching our resources with the requirements. In other words, we're not really prepared. We have this bravado, we're going to go ahead and do something, but without necessarily having all of our ducks in a row to begin with, and then proceeding, properly. And maybe a little bit more too headstrong, too not properly thought out, not planned. Under the sway of rajas, the mind that grabs shrinks, but the mind that gives, again, sattva, grows in plenitude. So the mind that grabs shrinks. Now think about that. It's like it has restricted its scope to that thing that it's grabbing, not opening itself to all the possibilities. And perhaps if it did, it would find that there would be something else better to go after than that one thing that we're grabbing. Okay, so I guess just summary, rajas is stimulating, active, and can lead to painful results. Now, tamas is the last one, and I think the best picture is painted of this one in these verses, or maybe it's just my imagination, but it seems that it's crystal clear. Tamas is considered heavy, clouded, indifferent, lazy. These are the sort of the attitudes or the mental makeup of the person, hugely under the sway of tamas. Chapter 14. Know indeed that tamas is born of ignorance, which confuses or deludes all embodied beings. It binds fast by heedlessness, negligence, indolence, and sleep. Indiscrimination, confusion, inertness, heedlessness, delusion, these arise when tamas is predominant. Okay, now we go through the list of topics. Sacrifice, devoid of faith, contrary to the ordinances, with no food offered, sacred text lacking, and without a fee to the priest, without mantras, proper mantras. This is declared to be tamasic. So I don't know if this is correct exactly, but I imagine that, there were some, even in Thakur's time, there were dacoits, like bandit robber types that were outlaws, really, really outside the law. And many of them were devoted to the goddess Kali, and they made sacrifices to Kali, but they were not proper yagyas. They didn't have food, texts, fees to any priest or anything. It was just pretty much, okay, Kali, we're going to slaughter this person and offer it to you, that kind of a thing. So that's a tamasic sacrifice. That austerity which is practiced with a foolish obstinacy, with self-torture, or for the purpose of destroying another, is declared to be tamasic. In the Puranas, the stories, there are several different stories of people who would have a grudge against somebody else, and so they would perform austerities in order to get some kind of a boon from some god or goddess or whatever, in order to get back at somebody for some supposed wrong that they felt had been dealt to them by this other person. So there are stories like that. I don't know current time how applicable this would be, but I suppose it's possible that there might be, well, actually, yeah. India has very interesting, like Guinness Book of World Records, kinds of things, and there are people who do very strange things and end up in the Guinness Book. So there's things like somebody who keeps their hand up forever, for instance. These kinds of things. Even keeping it raised like this till it withers. There's like nothing left here. For what? They must have, there's some purpose they're doing this for. God only knows. But that self-torture of the body is characteristic of this kind of austerity. The gift that is given at the wrong place or time to unworthy persons, without respect, or with insult or contempt, is tamasic. There's a story of Holy Mother. One of the women in her entourage was presumably giving alms to people, or kind of feeding them, but she was like throwing the food from some distance, onto their plate, and Mother chastised her because it's insulting. If you're going to feed the poor, you don't have to be insulting about it. The renunciation or abandonment of any obligatory duty through delusion or ignorance is not proper and is tamasic. So, an obligatory duty, something that you're supposed to do. Okay, like, for instance, let's say someone is supposed to be taking care of their parents, let's say, aged parents or something like that. And then to abandon that and say, oh, I'm going to go, to the Himalayas and become, a sadhu or whatever, leaving the parents with no other support. That's not proper. That's tamasic. The knowledge that clings or is attached to one single object or effect as if it were the whole, and without reason or concern for cause, without a real purpose or foundation in truth, and trivial, that is tamasic. I'm going to have more on this in a little bit. That action which is undertaken because of delusion, disregarding consequences, loss, or injury to others, as well as one's own strength and ability, that is tamasic. Undisciplined, unsteady, vulgar, obstinate, stubborn, wicked, or malicious, despondent, dilatory, procrastinating, indolent, lazy, such an agent is tamasic. I happened to one time, not that my personal experience is that important or anything, because I'm sure we've seen it all in movies and everything like that, but I happened one time to be in a situation where I actually saw somebody who was drugged out, like almost like opium kind of a thing, like an opium kind of a thing. And that is, to me, pretty much the height of Tamas, complete indolence, complete stubbornness too, over and over again, to do the same, to do the same thing and subject oneself, to become just kind of like a lump until the next hit of whatever. That's a very tamasic state of living. That intellect, which enveloped in darkness, regards adharma as dharma, that is wrong, as right, and views all things in a perverted way, that is tamasic intelligence. Real perversion, complete turnabout. That firmness by which a dull wit or a stupid man does not give up sleep, fear, grief, despair, depression, and conceit, that is tamasic. That happiness which deludes the self both at the beginning and at the end, and which arises from sleep, sloth, indolence, and negligence or miscomprehension, that is tamasic. So, commentary. So the picture that emerges is of one who has very limited interests in life and is fully confined in that. They can't see beyond that. Their whole life is circumscribed by trivia, and that is taken to be the all. What he knows is insignificant, yet he considers it the whole, and the prop and support of his life. He doesn't listen to advice. He won't change his ways, tends to bring harm to others, is dishonest, chronically frustrated, cynical, unsuccessful, can't be counted on, doesn't know what is what, and therefore his actions are sporadic, unplanned, and inefficient, and without attention. In devotion, he assumes that things should go the way that he wants, so he thinks he can coerce God. And Ramakrishna refers to the tamasic devotee in exactly that kind of a way. He talks about, kind of forcing God to do your bidding, one's bidding. And speaking of Ramakrishna, from the Gita, there are 3 verses in chapter 14 that from which he probably got the idea of the 3 robbers, Ramakrishna's story of the 3 robbers. So here they are. Sattva causes attachment to happiness, virtue, knowledge. Rajas causes attachment to action. Tamas, obscuring knowledge, causes attachment to negligence. The fruit of good action is sattvic and pure. The fruit of rajas is pain, and the fruit of tamas is ignorance. From sattva, knowledge is born, and from rajas, desire. Negligence and delusion arise from tamas and also ignorance. So, in conclusion, he is said to have risen above the Gunas, who hates not light, activity, and delusion when present, so that would be sattva, rajas, and tamas, nor longs after them when absent. He who, like one unconcerned, is moved not by the Gunas, who, knowing that the Gunas operate, is firm and moves not, balanced in pleasure and pain, self-abiding, the same to agreeable and disagreeable people, firm, the same in censure and praise, the same in honor and dishonor, the same to friend and foe. Abandoning all personal undertakings, he is said to have risen above the modes. So, from where we stand, experience implies education. Education implies reassessment of our situation. Reassessment implies turning around, extricating ourselves from incorrect and erroneous identification. And once that is accomplished, we've obtained freedom. Spiritual wisdom is the removal of the ignorance that prevents us from undertaking this journey. In actuality, you are the one that you seek. Kayena vacha manasendriyarva buddhyatmanava prakritir swabhavat karomi adyat sakalam parasmai narayanayeti samarpayami. Whatever I do with my body, speech, mind, and senses, by my intellect, self, or nature, all those I offer unto the Supreme Lord, Narayana.